Today is November 15th, 2021, and we are very pleased to have Carolyn Dean, who's a member of the Conservation Commission, but is here in her own right tonight to talk about converting lawns into pollinator gardens. It should be really interesting, so I hope you all enjoy it. Thank you, Carolyn Dean, for being with us and for your expertise. Please tell us a little bit about your background.
Sure, thank you. Will we continue with this business the whole time?
Do you have your, yeah, you have.
Yes.
Well, tell us about your background. Tell us what, that you're, I know you're a garden designer, among other things.
Right, so I've been a gardener ever since before I was born. I've always loved smelling like earth and dirt and observing things in my childhood home, my yard. I used to catch houseflies with a butterfly net, catch them in a jar and watch them. When my folks had a vegetable garden and flower gardens, and that's where my passion is. My passion is in nature. And that's where I find healing too. I find serenity, peace, love, healing. I go outside and I turn that into a business. And my business is Garden 911 Boston. And for certifications, I'm a Rhode Island certified horticulturist. At Native Plant Trust, formerly Garden in the Woods. I have an advanced certificate in native plant horticulture and design. So basically you could say I'm a native plant geek. What I'd like to talk about tonight, may I continue?
Yes, thank you.
Yes. Is why in the world do we have lawns? I'd like to hear from some of us tonight. How do our lawns serve us? And is that the best use of our land? So I'd just like to hear from some of you. Why do you have a lawn that you mow or pay someone to mow, that you fertilize or pay somebody to fertilize, that you water, or pay your water bills to water? What is so important about your lawn?
I just like it aesthetically.
Who else?
You can use it recreationally.
Yeah, good one. What else?
Fun to mow.
Say it again.
It's fun to mow.
It's fun to mow. Who else thinks it's fun to mow?
It always looks better afterwards.
I'm with the Bill.
No, sitting on that self-propel thing for an hour or so, the line was emptied out.
Well, I honestly, Bill, I've never had that experience. So maybe I can come over sometime and have that experience.
Yeah, that's what they're doing.
Well, what I'd like to share tonight is a story about a woman who happens to live in Seekonk. She's a retired professor of Greek literature. And she called me one day and she said, "How would you like to help me turn my lawn into pollinator gardens?" And I said, "We might be a match made in heaven." And so I was telling her the other day about being here tonight with everyone. And I asked her, "Why are you doing this?" And she said, for her, "My yard was the most boring place ever. I looked out my screen porch, and all I saw was a green carpet." And she discovered that she could turn that into part of the solution of helping our ecosystems recover from deforestation and fragmentation and the decline in species. We're undergoing a mass extinction right now. So she realized that every yard matters and every garden counts. Every square foot of your yard could be a place for recreation, or if you love to mow it, that's wonderful. But I'd like you to think about turning a part of it into a place where butterflies like to visit, where birds like to visit, where other wildlife likes to visit. And the way that works is if you provide it's kind of the ecosystem, right? If you have plants that support pollinators, that support insects, what do you think birds eat? Insects and seeds. And to put it all together, we can create better habitats at our own homes. So here's a little pop quiz. Imagine one pair of chickadees in the spring. They're building a nest, and they mate, and they have a number of eggs in their nest. And those chicks hatch, and it takes, I think, maybe a couple of weeks for them to fledge. How many caterpillars do you think one pair of this one little bird needs to feed their young to fledging? Is it in the hundreds? Is it in the thousands? Is it in the tens of thousands?
Depends on the size of the cat.
Good one. That's a good one. So I'll tell you, it's something like 8,000 to 9,000 caterpillars that one pair of chickadees needs to raise their young. Wow. Okay? That's a lot of caterpillars. And where do caterpillars come from? They come from an egg that was laid by a female butterfly or moth. And when that female laid her egg, where she laid it, it's because she knew by evolution, since the retreat of the ice age and glaciers, she knew that when her baby hatched, when it was born, it would start eating immediately, like caterpillars do, right? We all know the kind of damage caterpillars can do. And that plant has a special relationship with that species of caterpillar. And once the caterpillars hatch, here comes the birds right on time to feed their young. So the web of life is what we can invite into our yards when we create more native habitat. So this woman called me, she says, I have this huge lawn and I hate it, it's boring. Excuse me. And now, a year and a half later, she says, I love going in my yard. That's how long we've been working on it together. She looks out her screen porch and she is compelled to go look. She notices the changes from day to day to day in her yard. She sees the butterflies. She sees the bees. She knows that if we want to eat something like, Ed, help me out here, something like 80% of our food depends on bees for pollination. If we want to have food, we need to have pollinators. So I'd like you to think about, let's see, anybody know Doug Tallamy, Dr. Doug Tallamy, the entomologist from the University of Delaware? His, not the most recent book, but the book before that, I think it was called Nature's Last Hope. He's saying that we, as stewards of our land, we are nature's best hope in our own backyards to recreate the connectivity and of the habitats on which animals depend. And it turns out that it's not just about the animals. When we have functioning ecosystems, we have our water filtered. We have floods mitigated. Think about one big oak tree. What comes to mind is the big one in the park, Frothingham Park, in the center field. I'm not sure the numbers of a tree with that circumference, but I'm gonna say it might soak up tens of thousands of gallons of water every year. Imagine how much that land would flood if it didn't soak up that. I mean, it already floods now, right? But if not for that tree, it would flood even more. Trees, when it's storming out, trees interfere, their leaves interfere with the rain coming down, and a lot of that moisture gets evaporated back into the sky and never hits the ground. Trees take care of us. Trees mitigate weather. Trees mitigate climate change. And we need them. And don't salivate, make your glass oak. We can all make a difference in our own yards. Now, I want to apologize, I'm having a glitch with my projector today. Let it be the worst thing that happened all day, that my little USB stick will be occupied by my projector. I think I'm gonna turn off the lamp. Save it for another day. So my sincere apologies. So, is anybody interested at all? Just running a small patch of our lawn. It's a native plant habitat.
I actually kind of did like a little bit of that. I started a project, it was during the start of the pandemic, I started turning some of my backyard into like a rock garden, but it had like all kinds of different plants interspersed with the rocks. And already I had a number of butterflies and bees, just very interested in the area.
Wonderful, thank you for sharing that, that's exciting.
Yeah, it is, it's, and I just keep adding on to this kind of thing where you can sort of, you don't have to stop, you can, as time allows, just keep working on it. So it's kind of like a fun little backyard project.
Right.
But my question was, for like serious, pollinated gardens, there's got to be some sort of upkeep that you have to do, right?
Of course.
This kind of thing is more like it just keeps developing, and I don't really put a lot of, like time into the plants, you know what I mean?
Uh-huh.
So,
Sure. You know what succession is? Over time, a meadow wants to become a forest. And then the trees reach the end of their lives and fall down and collapse, and it becomes an open area again. So different plants can show up. So there's always a progression of what wants to live in a landscape. And so, yes, if you want to keep it how it is, I mean, Cindy, you have perennials that have gotten this big, right?
right.
So, in nature, everything competes and cooperates all the time. Right? Think about birds, think about that pair of chickadees. But that male, he probably fought other males for that mate, right? You see birds in the spring doing their mating, cock-a-doodle-doos, right? They compete fiercely for mates, for nesting sites, so they can reproduce. And yet, in the fall, when it comes to migration, not so much chickadees, but other birds, when it comes time for migration, they cooperate. They fly together. They use the air left off each other's wings to cooperate to get to their winter places. So plants compete and cooperate all the time. So, you can, over time, they'll just fight it out. But if you want to keep it how it is, it takes maintenance. Yes. Yeah. Anyone else? Native plants?
How do we keep the invasive plants that we have from coming in?
Well, that's
Where they let something go.
good luck. Okay,
Repeat the question for us.
sure. Right, okay, so, right, thank you. So the question is, go ahead, Cindy.
No, you can go ahead.
All right,
It's on. So I just stopped it.
Yes.
My question is, how do we keep invasive species from invading your property when you try to make it, wild?
right, great question, Cindy, thank you. So they are ultra competitive. Many of them push out their leaves earlier in the spring than many of our native plants, so they get an early jump start. And in the fall, many of them stay green later than our native plants. So they are, part of the reason they're so invasive is that they outcompete and they don't have native predators for native plants. So it's a constant battle. I confess I have 2 burning bushes in my yard, which my spouse insists that we hang on to. And it's kind of junk food. It's beautiful because the red cardinal in the winter comes. Imagine the snow and the cardinal comes and eats the berries, but that's very low nutritional value for those birds. So they eat it, they poop it out someplace else, and the tree grows. And where that invasive plant is, could be a native plant, native shrub, that is very high functioning in the environment, providing all kinds of habitat, food, shelter, nesting sites. That's a high functioning plant. And so, first thing with invasive plants is to ID them properly, to know their life cycle, to know where their vulnerabilities are in their life cycles, and attack them at that time. Usually it's before they flower or before their seeds ripen. Some of it spreads mostly by roots. You just, it's difficult. You need to know them and know their vulnerabilities. Sometimes you need help. Right. Anybody interested in how to go about turning a small, let's say the circle here between, I remember your name, Ernie, yes, Ernie, and this pole and this pole and this front row of seating here. What if we wanted to turn a patch of lawn that big into a pollinator garden? What would you do? Right, good one. What would you do with the cardboard? How do you know that? That's how you killed your lawn?
In some places, that's still have fun.
So you've done this, oh, right.
I did it with newspaper.
The newspaper.
Newspaper, wet the newspaper, and put a straw on top of the newspaper.
Right, fantastic. So say more about that.
I read it years ago in the New York Times.
They don't see us.
That's a real big
You got it. Wait until the end for questions. Because. John, love it.
I kind of lost my train of thought. I don't know.
Questions at the end, you can pass this one around. Please, we won't give it up.
Sure. Thank you for the
Sorry.
reminder. So what they're talking about is something that I call sheet composting. Does that ring a bell? Right, so one way you could do it, you could rent a sod cutter and you could, take your time to go to the sod cutter rental place and rent it, bring it home, and figure out how to start it, and get gas, and, peel up your lawn with it. But it's more economical and ecological, in my opinion, if you cover that area. I like to use 2 layers of cardboard and then a lot of organic matter, which you've done. I like to bring in leaf mulch or bark mulch or compost. All these materials need to be really clean. Whenever you buy compost, you want to know where it came from. Right? It's really important. I've seen I will say even the town, I'm a member of the garden club, the city, and we have a couple of ornamental gardens at town hall. And I'm not sure, but whoever brought in the mulch into those beds, what came with them was a lot of field bindweed, which is an aggressive, invasive plant. And Cindy and I spent time this year trying to weed out that bindweed. And I believe it came in the mulch. It could have come in the plants, but it took a few years for it to appear in that bed. So you want to ask questions of your vendors. So after you get the cardboard down, you want to wet it, spray to your tray, and then put a lot of organic matter. It's a lasagna method or sheet composting because you put it in layers. So what I've been doing is putting 4 to 5 inches, most recently, of bulk bark mulch. It comes from Maine, from pine trees. I do worry about pine beetles coming in from Maine in that mulch. This time of year, the Coast of Maine products, which are somewhat local, at least they're regionally made, I believe that material is cooked really well, and any weed seeds are cooked out of it, and the shards of invasive plant roots or tissue that could, get itself going again is cooked out. And once you do that, you let it sit for at least 6 weeks. And next thing you know, you just start planting, you look at your backyard and you have a beautiful mulched bed with nothing growing in it. So that's when you can start putting in your native plants.
So you do this in the early spring?
We did it this year, yep, we gave it 6 weeks and most of the grass was dead. When we go to plant, it kind of push back the mulch. You take a utility knife, cut an X in the cardboard, what's left of it. And then you peel up those 4 corners and then you plant right into that if you're putting in a tree or shrub. Perennials can typically go right into the mulch. They do really well there. Yeah, and next thing you know, you have an area in your yard where you have more birds, you have more butterflies, you have more native bees. There's something like 125 native species of bees in Massachusetts. We count on them. Even though we at Langwater Farm, we see the boxes of bees out in the field. Those bees are from Europe, and their populations have been really challenged. A lot of them are dying off. If we would rely more on our native bees and support them better, we would get these free services from our native bees to pollinate our food. So I'd like you to imagine your own home, your own backyard. If there were a space there where you could make a start, would you do it? Yes? Bill? Don't think so? Yep. Who else? I'm really curious. This is not right or wrong. I'm just asking.
I would.
Yeah?
I have a back part of my property that's, falling down trees.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna cut it down and let it go wild. I'm not gonna say anything more.
Sorry, what would you like me to do? So you were saying you have a bunch of trees that have come down?
Yeah, the back part of the property is all trees that's falling down, and then it's gonna cut down the wires. They say if you put in a line, you don't put a line in it for a while, and then the first. If you want to. I have some back land, 6,000 square feet, and there are trees, more 36, 50. The trees have come down, so instead of cutting half the trees away because they're falling down to the storms, I could cut almost all the trees down and just make a pollinated thing out of that. My neighbors years ago, they took their equivalent on their land and they did a lawn. And that's not what I don't want to do. I don't want a much bigger lawn. So that would be a good idea. I just want to know what I would do if I could get down to stumps. Maybe just leave the stumps and just do something to do ground cover and stuff.
Right, so this is interesting. So the trees that have come down, what else is growing there?
Well, no ivy, and there's a lot of rock. It's up here in northeastern, Yeah, there's just a lot of rock and a lot of trees that have never been, they're half down, a lot of half down trees. But
So I just want to appreciate you for wanting to do this, and I want to just be really clear that is some kind of habitat.
yes.
For some animals.
Deer, there's a lot of deer. Driving through those pieces of water. They're all my neighbors have.
Yep.
It's an old-fashioned wood lot.
Yep. Right. So what that kind of points to is diversity. If you can bring diversity into that area, that could be a win, even though you may be removing some habitat. You have to find your own balance with that.
Well, the adjacent property is completely lawn, so it's not like I would be a clearer than everybody has forest. So it would be interesting for our because I certainly don't want to throw lawn in there. And every storm, you have a couple of trees that come down.
Thank you.
Could you describe your
recent conversion of Women's Lawn in Rhode Island. I know you've gone several times to her property, and you are converting those lawns into pollinator plants. Could you list some of the pollinator plants that you find are most indigenous to our area?
Sure, thank you for asking, yes. So, just to be clear, this property is in Seaport, which directly abuts Rhode Island. So native plants, it could be trees, shrubs, vines, perennials, cactus, we have one native cactus, the prickly pear. So a lot of it depends on what your habitat is, right? So if you have dry shade, there's a community of plants that want to grow and live and thrive there. If you have well-drained, full sun, that's another plant community of plants that have relationships with each other. So with this particular property, our anchoring plant is a river birch. There's a cultivar, but it's very difficult to find species. That's our anchor. It's a dwarf one, it's about this tall. And we have, for ground covers underneath that, we have a native Pachysandra. The birch tree is pretty good for pollinators. It's probably the top 4 or 5, the 5th most important tree or shrub for pollinators. The very, very, very most important plants by far are native oak trees. Could be any kind of oak tree, red, white, either of those families, pin oaks, scarlet oaks. Those trees support in Massachusetts something like 500 species of butterflies and moths. That is, those species go to that plant to lay their eggs, which attach to caterpillars, which are, food for the birds. As far as the herbaceous perennials, the 2 most important by far are goldenrods and asters. And many people think that in the fall it's the goldenrod that gives us the allergies, but really it's ragweed, which is wind pollinated. All wind pollinated plants make a tremendous amount of pollen because it has to travel in the wind, right? The goldenrod rods are long blooming and asters are long blooming. So even if you add, 2 or 3 of those plants, you make a big impact.
I just have a quick question about the birds eating caterpillars. Do birds eat all kinds of caterpillars, like, for example, like gypsy moths and orange moths? Because often they can damage your trees. We've had a lot of problems with that on Allen Road where I live.
Right, I've seen that.
Right, yeah. Just wondering, is it a good thing to leave them for the birds to get? Or I don't know if they would eat those caterpillars.
Well, that's a good question. They're not native to our area, right? They came from Asia, I believe.
Oh, yeah, no, that I don't know.
And so birds aren't evolved to know to eat them. And they have some kind of unfair advantage where their population gets so high and they're not eaten enough by birds that they can do a lot of damage to our trees. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so typically the birds wouldn't be eating those caterpillars.
Well, but perhaps maybe we do have some birds that are from the same areas where those caterpillars are from, the same continent or area. So those birds probably eat those caterpillars. But as far as our native birds eating caterpillars that they've grown to over the generations to know where different food sources, that's a conflict because wherever those invasive species are may not be palatable to our native birds.
Okay, yes. That answers my question. Thank you. Cindy, yes.
Carol? When you have, a wooded area in the back, when you do have trees that fall down and you have saplings that come up, is it best to just remove that debris, or is it just to best to leave it there and let it just vegetate and become habitat for whatever?
It's a great question. Our woods are kind of not in a natural state. and they haven't been in a natural state. Not that many years ago, when Europeans came to this land, most of the trees in New England were cut down. And so that opens up a lot of sunlight and a lot of competition for new growth to come in. So things are, even though, you grew up here, how the woods look to you seems normal to you as me, right? I don't know how normal that is in a long history of evolution and geology. So another thing that's really out of whack with our woods is the deer population is really high. And deer browse what they can reach. They come into our yards and they eat what they can eat. And so if you were to put money into, reestablishing a ground cover, unless you could protect that with fencing or deterrence, there's a lot of ways you can deter deer. Really, using many methods works the best. You can put bamboo stakes in. What's kind of funny, it's kind of like pickup sticks on end. But deer don't like to put their head down in sticks like that. 8-foot fence, it's a pretty good deterrent. But that only makes the deer go to your neighbor's house, so how good is that? There are repellents like Bobex is a product, I think it, among other things, does or did at one point contain coyote urine. Well, that will scare off a deer. Well, that's great, but how do you harvest coyote urine? You trap wild animals, you cage them, you catheterize them, and then they die. So, that's a rough way to go. So, there's some challenges. Does that answer your question? No. I guess so. Yeah. Yes.
Now, do you have some parting words for us who are novice pollinators?
Yes, thank you. Think like a butterfly. Think like a bird. And let that guide how you are on your land. Think about the whole system of which we are a part. That we depend on that system, and that system depends on us. And we are nature's best hope. Thank you, Priscilla.
And thank you, Carol and Dean, for putting it all in perspective. We are just a speck on this planet, and we have to respect all the other specks, don't we? So thank you again, one more time. And thank you for your expertise as a garden designer, as a geek in all things conservation and preservation and so forth. We appreciate you coming to the Easton Grange tonight, and we hope to see some of those in our viewing audiences to come and experience some of our very interesting programs, such as the one we have enjoyed tonight, thanks to Carol Lundeen, who also serves on our Easton Conservation Commission, and we appreciate your service. Thank you again. So this is Priscilla Almquist-Olsen saying adieu for tonight, and hopefully those of you who are joining us by TV, by ECAT, will come to our meetings held on the third Monday of every month except January and February. 6 o'clock is supper at the Oaks Ames Memorial Hall. 7 o'clock is our program. Thank you for joining us this evening. Be well.